Dear colleagues, dear friends, it's a pleasure for me to welcome you all to this event, this launch of MIPEX, the Migrant Integration Policy Index, at the Institute for Social Research. That is, I'm faking it. I am in Geneva, and I put this up on the wall behind me. But this is an international, truly international event. So we'll have Thomas Huddleston joining us from Brussels, Staver joining us from Oslo, and it's all organized by Hege at the Institute for Social Research in Oslo. This is a great occasion for us and a great event for us because we have been looking forward to seeing all the scores for Norway and how that comes out compared to other countries when it comes to the possibilities and the framework for integration, which MIPEX expresses very well. 52 countries have been reporting and on different strands, which will be explained to you later. They all kind of talk to the framework and the possibilities for migrants to participate after having residency in a country and to integrate. Today's program is that I will hold this short introduction, and then I'll leave the word to our keynote speaker, Thomas Huddleston, which I'll introduce very shortly. And that will be followed by some comments from Staver. And then from there on, we'll have a conversation for the last minutes of the total of 1 hour, which this event will last. So, and you please feel free to comment in the chat field. We'll not use the question answer function, but use the chat function on the side. You can comment and ask questions in Norwegian or English, and then Hege at ESF will pick that up and we'll feed that into our conversation. Let me just say a few words about the title of today's event. Hvor gode Norge på integrering? This may lead us to think that we will be discussing the outcomes, how the integration is actually faring in Norway compared to other countries. But the MIPEX, as I said, is about the framework, the policies of integration, and how those are rated up against the policies of other countries. There is a report made by the OECD, which rates the outcome that's from, I think, 2018, and we will provide a link afterwards to that report, as well as other links to the MIPEX webpage for Norway and the overall MIPEX webpage. You'll get all that information afterwards, and you can look into the outcomes as well. We will discuss some of those, but that is not the main topic today. Before I start, I would just like to thank Thomas and the MIPEX team in Brussels. It's an enormous endeavor to gather all this information from the 52 countries. We all know that statistics and comparing statistics in this field is very challenging, as each country have their own system and tradition of doing and gathering statistics. But in this field, the MIPEX have been able to push through and gather information from the 52 countries and making them comparable. And as you will see, it is very well, the webpage for MIPEX is very well suited to explore the data in a way that's very difficult in most publications in this field. The last time Anna in 2015 was the last time we gathered this data, and Anna and I did that. This year, ESF and I did that on our own. And it's been a big change. It's been a minor change, or there have been some important changes to Norwegian policies, but there has been a major change in the environment for integrating, in particular, forced migrants, as we know, following the 2015 influx record and the asylum crisis. So that we will get back to that and some of the features and the measures that were introduced into Norwegian legislation, which has had consequences also in the field of integration. So we'll get back to those in detail in a little bit. But first, without further ado, let me introduce Thomas Huddleston. He's research director at MIPEX and is kind of the the man who has been following this from the very start and been pushing for this last round, this most recent round of the MIPEX score. So please, Thomas, we're very happy that you're joining us. Are you in Brussels, by the way?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Jan-Paul, for bringing me in.
The floor is yours, Thomas. Here you go.
Great. Thank you so much to Jan-Paul and to the Institute for your hard work to bring Norway on board. And it's great to always see that our colleagues in Norway are interested in comparing themselves to the rest of the world and to finding international solutions to our challenges on integration. Now, the Migrant Integration Policy Index is produced primarily by the Migration Policy Group. We have been working for 25 years to try and promote more inclusive societies by informing our political debates on anti-discrimination, integration, and legal migration, while also contributing to the sector of civil society and research on our topics. We provide resources that can be used as common reference points. All of our research is publicly available so that it can be shown to be of the highest quality. And we collect evidence in a comparative manner across Europe and internationally, and work with civil society actors, researchers, and governments who want to take action based on these findings. Some of you might be familiar with the Migrant Integration Policy Index, but you might not know how it's being used. So the MIPEX is the most comprehensive tool to compare integration policies. It has the greatest number of indicators that are available to be able to see which countries do the least, the most, and something in between. We also have one of the most robust methodologies for collecting this data by working with national experts like Jan-Paul and his team, but also by providing months of quality and consistency checks here from our team in Brussels. We are also comprehensive because we have a commitment to continue to update the MIPEX. We now have data from 2007 until 2019. We continue to expand the MIPEX thematic scope. Since 2015, we've been collecting data on migrant health policies, which have become more relevant with the COVID crisis. And we continue to expand now with 52 countries, including many major destination countries in Latin America and East Asia. But MIPEX is not just comprehensive in terms of the inputs that we provide, but also the outcomes that MIPEX has produced. MIPEX is the most cited international benchmark. It is used by global actors. For example, the Zero draft of the Global Compact on Migration recommended that all states participate in MIPEX in order to identify their policy challenges and best practices. MIPEX is also regularly used by NGOs who are looking for new solutions, governments that are looking for new solutions, media that are looking to compare their countries, and also by researchers. MIPEX, when I last checked, had 4,500 citations on Google Scholar, and are really helping migration researchers get out of their methodological nationalism in order to be able to see the relative strengths and weaknesses of their approach on policies and the links with integration outcomes. Now, what's interesting about this new edition of MIPEX is that we use core indicators. So we have actually looked at all the indicators we used and done statistical reliability checks to identify which ones are really the most reliable, and we focused in on those indicators. And we've been able to analyze those core indicators to see overall what defines a country's approach to integration. We look at how integration policies work in 8 areas of life, which you're going to see later. These are the MIPEX strands. But when we looked across all of the indicators, we actually saw that there are 3 different components to integration policies in these different areas. So countries can grant immigrants and their citizens basic rights. For example, the right to non-discrimination, to participate and access the labor market, the health system, the education system. Secondly, countries can promote equal opportunities by supporting immigrants to address their specific needs so that they can fully participate in the education system, in the labor market, in political life. And thirdly, countries can grant immigrants an equal sense of security that their citizens enjoy by giving them a perspective to settle over the long term, by knowing that they will be able to settle permanently with their families and fully participate as citizens. Based on this, we now have new classifications that explain countries' approaches to integration. So the top 10 of our 52 MIPEX countries guarantee equal rights, opportunities, and security for immigrants and for their citizens. Other countries with a comprehensive approach to integration do offer rights, opportunities, and security, but they have still some obstacles to overcome. Countries that only grant temporary integration are countries that offer immigrants equal rights and opportunities, but not that long-term support that they would need to really fully participate and develop a strong sense of belonging and future in the country. Countries that only offer equality on paper will offer immigrants basic rights and security like their citizens, but ignore the specific needs that immigrants have and don't invest in equal opportunities for immigrants and their citizens. Countries that only offer minimum integration provide, the basic rights required by international or EU law and a minimum sense of security, but don't do very much to actually overcome the many obstacles that immigrants face in a new country. And lastly, we now have some new countries in MIPEX that offer immigration without integration, that allow immigrants to settle long-term, but deny them basic rights and opportunities. So you're going to see where Norway falls in these categorizations. Also, in this new version of MIPEX, what's most significant for researchers is that we are linking integration policies and outcomes. There are over 130 peer-reviewed scientific studies using multivariate and multi-level analysis that link MIPEX to specific integration outcomes for immigrants and for the public. And so you will be seeing this as I go through now and give you the key results. So here are the overall scores for Norway. You can access them all on mipex.eu/Norway. Overall, Norway comes out with a comprehensive approach to integration, trying to offer equality in all areas of life to immigrants and Norwegian citizens. But Norway is only in the second tier of countries, not in the top 10. Since 2014, Norway has lost 3 points on the MIPEX 100-point scale, going down from 72 overall to 69. And Norway has fallen out of the top 10 of the 32 countries because Norway continues to grant equal rights and opportunities to immigrants and Norwegian citizens. But because of minor changes in the path to permanent residence and citizenship, immigrants and particularly newcomers no longer enjoy that equal sense of long-term security about their future in Norway. Now, this gives you an overview of how Norway scores in the 8 policy areas that we look at in MIPEX. Norway is highlighted here in red, and I have compared Norway for you only, and this is not public yet, to the other Nordic countries to give you an idea of how Norway compares. So Norway has strengths in offering equal rights and opportunities to immigrants, and that's quite similar to Finland and to Sweden in terms of the commitment to equal opportunities in economic, social, political, and health spheres. But overall, Norway has stayed in a middle of the way approach within the Nordics. So it is actually behind inclusive Finland and Sweden, and slightly ahead of a more restrictive Denmark and Iceland. Because Norway is more similar to Iceland, and to some extent Denmark, in the insecurity about its long-term as a country of immigration. Now, how does that play out if we look at the different 8 areas of MIPEX? In terms of labor market mobility, Norway's policies rank 4th alongside Canada, Germany, and the other Nordic countries by offering effective support and opportunities to non-EU immigrants. Its family reunification policies are more contradictory. Norway's policies are less restrictive than Denmark's, but more than Sweden, Finland, and traditional destination countries, as Norway imposes major obstacles for separated families. In the area of education, Norway is in the international top 10 on education, and its well-developed equity policies are helping all types of children to achieve and feel safe and at home at school. In the area of health, Norway is also in the international top 10 on health, with well-coordinated and responsive policies that could still be more inclusive of migrants of all statuses and in all ways of developing health policy. In the area of political participation, Norway continues its tradition as an inclusive Nordic democracy, and its anti-discrimination policies do offer strong laws and equity policies, but more could be done, for example, to fight nationality discrimination, where Norway has weaker protections than most countries. The 2 major areas of change are in the permanent residence and access to nationality policies. So while positively naturalized citizens can, thanks to the 2019 law, become dual nationals in Norway, as in most developed destination countries, non-EU newcomers have a more insecure future in Norway because following up on earlier restrictions on family migration, Norway's flexible path to permanent residence and citizenship has been replaced in 2017 by language integration and income tests, which may exclude some immigrants who are putting in the effort to learn the language and participate as much as they can. These restrictions can have long-term consequences for Norway's high levels of naturalization, political participation, common sense of belonging, and trust. Now, why do these policies matter? Since MIPEX has been used so much by researchers, we can draw on these 130 scientific studies in peer-reviewed journals that look at the links between these policies and the outcomes for immigrants and the public. And one of the major conclusions is that the way that governments treat immigrants really matters for how integration works as a two-way process. What I mean by that is that the way that governments treat immigrants strongly influences how well immigrants and the public interact and think of each other. Integration policies are one of the strongest factors that reshape public's willingness to accept and interact with immigrants, but also are one of the strongest factors that reshapes immigrants' own attitudes, belonging, participation, and even their health in their new country. So I'm going to show you some results from these various peer-reviewed studies. If you're interested, please go in and read more. But there are now dozens of studies using data from across Europe that find that policies and public opinion are very strongly linked. And while you might assume that public opinion drives policies, it also works in the other way around, as many people in the public are not very aware of immigrants and of the issues, and it's policymakers and the political debates that inform immigrants about the public about whether immigrants are a threat or an opportunity. And so several researchers have found that integration policies can be part of a virtuous cycle that reinforces positive attitudes towards immigrants, as in the case traditionally of Norway, where people feel less threats towards immigrants, but also more restrictive policies can unleash a vicious cycle where the public starts to see more and more immigrants as threats. These overall integration policies not only affect how the public thinks and interacts with immigrants, but also affects how immigrants feel about their own lives in the countries. And that's been measured in various ways in terms of the gaps that immigrants report in terms of their life satisfaction. That's what I present here, where we see that countries with more inclusive integration policies tend to have lower gaps in life satisfaction as reported by immigrants. But this has also been measured in other ways in terms of immigrants' sense of belonging, national identity, a sense of patriotism, and general feelings of welcome in society and also at school. There are also now around a dozen studies that have been peer-reviewed in the LANCET, one of the most prestigious international health journals, that suggest that our country's overall approach to integration has consequences for immigrants' health, not just their physical self-reported health, but also their mental health. And I really recommend that you dive into this research, particularly in these times of COVID. I wanted to end by focusing on some of the areas that have been raised by the new Norwegian results, where we see that some minor changes in the path to permanent residence and citizenship have undermined the sense of long-term security that immigrants can have in Norway. So why would this matter for integration outcomes in Norway? Well, there are only a few studies actually that have looked at, say, links between family reunification policies and the likelihood of immigrants to reunite. And not surprisingly here, countries that make their family reunification policies more inclusive or more restrictive seem to have a major effect on the non-EU family reunification rates in their countries. So non-EU family reunification policies certainly have an impact on the likelihood that families will remain separated or be able to reunite. There's also not been that much research on the path to permanent residence, but here I wanted to point out one very interesting study that found, with complicated estimates of how long immigrants are likely to spend in a country, that countries with more inclusive permanent residence policies end up having immigrants who settle more long-term in the country. There's been a lot more research on the link between citizenship policies and naturalization rates, and perhaps not surprisingly there, citizenship policies emerge as the main factor that determine whether or not immigrants become citizens in our countries. Both the legal requirements that are in place on paper matter, but also the procedures and these questions about documentation and the flexibility of the path also matter for shaping immigrants' interest to naturalize. And so a change in the MIPEX citizenship policy scale from 0 to 100 can have a major impact on the likelihood of immigrants, particularly from less developed countries, to naturalize. But what are the links between these types of policies and other areas of integration that we often speak about? Well, the results are not conclusive, and this is an area where we need greater research. So, for example, Besson et al. Looked to see what might be the links between different integration policies and the likelihood of immigrants in Europe to be in employment. And they found somewhat contradictory results. So, for example, immigrants seemed more likely to be in employment in countries that facilitated family reunification. But for immigrants that had a very strong ethnic identity, actually there it seemed like they were less likely to be in employment if they were in countries with facilitated family reunification. But for example, working on labor market measures or encouraging immigrants with strong ethnic identities to get involved in civil society and politics did seem to help them get into employment. So again, here you can see, well, policies don't seem to have the same effect on all different types of people, and making a restriction that applies to everyone in one way might benefit one group but not another. Similar contradictory findings have been found when we look at the links between citizenship and employment outcomes. So here, for example, you can see that migrant men and women who become citizens are more likely to be in employment. And we see that though facilitating citizenship policy might have less of an effect on employment and more of an effect on quality of employment. So are immigrants able to move on in their careers? But then again, we see that the effects might be different for immigrant men and for immigrant women. Here is a really interesting study that looked at this issue of quality of employment and from a gender perspective, to see whether immigrant women tend to be stuck in sectors of the labor market that have an over-concentration of women, right? So they are gender segregated in the labor market. And this study found that actually immigrant women are less likely to be segregated on the labor market in countries that facilitate family reunification and access to citizenship. So while effects might differ for men, when we look for women in this area, actually facilitating family unification and citizenship might be part of their path towards quality of employment. And we cannot reduce integration to employment or quality of employment. We're starting to get better across Europe at measuring different types of integration outcomes, for example, political participation. And here we see that citizenship policies do matter for immigrants' participation in politics, not just for their participation in electoral or conventional politics, but also for their participation in unconventional forms of politics. So to conclude, Norway's policies are comprehensive but second tier, falling out of the top 10, because newcomers and Norwegian citizens enjoy equal rights and opportunities, but no longer that equal sense of security. That's because these minor changes in the path to permanent residence and citizenship are quite sensitive, and they can have long-term consequences on Norway's high levels of naturalization, political participation, belonging, and trust. When we look at what these long-term security policies can do for integration outcomes, we see that they are clearly linked to whether or not immigrants are able to settle, and also to the kinds of positive immigrant and public attitudes that we want to be seeing. So guaranteeing a long-term security might be helping immigrants and the public see immigrants as potential citizens who can equally participate. But more research is needed internationally on the links between these policies and employment and language outcomes. So for the future, there might be some minor changes in Norwegian policies. Certainly small changes in terms of the path to family unification, permanent residence, and citizenship could offer the traditionally clear and flexible path that Norway offered, but we could also see future changes in Norway's approach to areas like health, education, and employment, where Norway has been a world leader in its integration policies. Thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I think you provided us with, you illustrated well how useful MIPEX can be, and you provide us with an excellent platform to discuss the recent developments and the current state of Norwegian integration regime and the policies we have. And to that point, please, Anne. Anne is senior researcher at NIBR, OsloMet. And she, as I said, she participated in the last round of MIPEX, providing the Norwegian score. Today we're happy to have you here, Anna, to comment on this year's MIPEX score and the Norwegian report. Please, Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be with you here and to be a bit now on the other side of the table and to take a look at the new score. And I've also recently done some work on these changes that are reflected in the MIPEX score with my colleague Helga Eggebø, where we looked at the policy changes following the high asylum inflows in 2015, and in particular highlighting the restrictions on the ability of refugees and immigrants to now access permanent residence. And this is a line of research that we've sought funding to pursue further, and looking also at the effects of these policies on the transition to employment and sense of belonging, just the kind of research that Thomas highlighted at the end here. So I think it's very valuable to have what we've found so far corroborated through the MIPEX score, and that the MIPEX will be a really useful resource for me and other researchers, especially with the broad comparative perspective. And I think in light of what I'm just saying, I think my comments will to some extent echo many of Thomas' comments already. And I think it is particularly interesting to see that Norway is having a reduction in its overall score and moving out of this top 10 ranking. A change that has occurred that would increase Norway's MIPEX score recently is that Norway has aligned itself with comparable countries in allowing dual citizenship. And this was, many people got to keep their citizenship in the past due to their inability to renounce the other citizenship. But this could open the door to some groups that previously avoided naturalization. At the same time, as we're speaking, there's new legislation in process that would raise the language requirement for citizenship further from A2 to B1 level. So while the door is opening wider in one respect, it's narrowing in another. And I want to note that the Norwegian approach over the past several years relies heavily on the use of incentives. And the introduction of strict language and now in income requirements for permanent residents has been justified with reference to the fact that this will encourage immigrants to learn the language and transition to the labor market with the access to permanent residence as a sort of carrot at the end to encourage self-sufficiency. And I think this is to some extent at odds with the logic of MIPEX, which emphasizes rights and opportunities. There are, of course, reasons to think that economic incentives can work, and at least for some people. And I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of resources put in towards providing training and educational opportunities especially for refugees, in order to be able to reach these goals, such as the introduction program for refugees and recent reforms emphasizing education. However, when we examine the policy process, looking at the introduction of the new requirements for permanent residents, we found that there wasn't a lot of sort of evidence put forward to demonstrate that it might work. And it is possible that this shift in policy based on effort, where you had to take part in the language program and you had to really show that you were making an effort, towards one based on achievement with a certain level of income, a certain level of Norwegian language, may leave people out, and especially, I think, vulnerable groups. And some people will simply not be able to meet the new requirements, especially as they're tightened further. And there are reasons to think that women, for example, and refugees may be more affected than other groups due to the employment gap. And of course, not all obstacles can be overcome by individual effort. And we know that there is discrimination in the labor market that could entail that the best efforts of immigrants to reach the goals that we've set for them do not result in steady employment. And I think it's a really important thing to think about right now, because we know from the past that immigrants are often last in and first out of the labor market during labor market downturns. And so the economic downturn caused by the pandemic could impact the ability of some immigrants to meet the requirement for permanent residence that have been introduced. And even short-term reliance on social assistance would bar them from applying in the following year. And we've seen in commissioned research projects that we and others have carried out that the access to permanent stay is really important for well-being and feeling of security, which is just the dimension of the equal sense of security that Thomas has highlighted in his comments. And of course, there are some exceptions from these new restrictions, but they're quite narrowly construed and with limited leeway. So I think the risk that you run with this kind of restriction is that there's a group of people who remain in a vulnerable position over time and who don't access permanent residence and in turn don't access citizenship, and they will then not have a route towards a political voice as well. And with a parallel policy emphasis on cessation and revocation of residence permits, which has occurred over the past few years, it also leaves them vulnerable to this, which has been a priority of the government and which may occur. Under certain circumstances, refugees may lose their residence in Norway until permanent residence is obtained. So I think the new MIPEX report provides a lot of food for thought and highlights areas of Norwegian integration policy that might merit some reconsideration, and especially if we want to align the efforts that we put into supporting immigrants into accessing the labor market, learning the language, and then having them also have the sense of security and ability to settle long term, and then eventually get access to citizenship and a political say in Norway as well. I'll leave my comments there and thank you again for letting me having this opportunity.
Thank you, Anna. You pointed out some very interesting, I think, kind of key points that provided a somewhat lower score for Norway this time around. And I think maybe we would like to start this conversation about something that's on some of our listeners and viewers' mind, which is, well, isn't this the result of a willed policy? Isn't it so that Norwegian political parties and the government want these further restrictions, these requirements as part of an incentive package on the one hand? On the other hand, it's about immigration policies. Making a stricter integration regime may seem and appear as tempting in an effort to reduce overall immigration, and in particular of irregular migrants or in particular asylum seekers, of course. I don't know, maybe you could start with you, Thomas. Could you comment on this crossroads between immigration policies and integration policies? Because that has been definitely a discussion in Norway since 2015, and some of these measures we see now were part of the package that kind of came about in the panic during the high influx fall of 2015, and then they've kind of been implemented over the last 5 years.
So I agree with you that Norwegian policymakers in some way overreacted to the 2015-16 arrivals by quickly changing policies more based on assumptions than evidence, and we've seen a major decrease in flows to Europe, not related to these policy decisions, but to other deals in the Mediterranean. And so what I would caution is that we are now 5 years from that time. So we've had newcomers who've been in Norway now for several years. They need to know that they can settle long-term, and that if they put in effort, as Anna was saying, that effort will be recognized. Not everyone can attain the same types of achievements. Many of these tests and requirements, as we know, are also unfortunately contingent on things like discrimination in the labor market, gender discrimination towards women in the labor market. Your level of education is one of the major factors that determines whether you can jump from something like A2 to B1 to C1 and all of this. So I think it's important at this point to realize that we should reassess the evidence. There has been some interesting research now, and MPG is part of this as a project called Hummingbird, to look at the links between integration policies and migration. And it's not as straightforward as you think. Many of our integration policies do not function as pull factors and do not seem to have any effect on whether people outside the country want or prefer to come to a specific country. And so instead, it might make more sense now to look at the evidence about what could be the effects on these newcomers who have been settled now in Norway for several years. What would it mean if there is not a return to a clear and more flexible path that actually rewards efforts?
Thank you. I would like you, Anna, to comment on that just in 1 second. But I've got a question here from Soya, one of our viewers, who asked you, Thomas, about the groups of migrants included, because using the term migrants and migrant integration, he just wondered whether that includes all migrants, both from the EU, within the EU, and the third countries, refugees, and labor migrants, etc. Could you just please specify that? And I would like your comments on the last topic, please, Thomas.
Sure. The integration policies and outcomes that have been measured through MIPEX are mostly looking at all first-generation immigrants. However, there are some policies and outcomes that are more relevant for non-EU citizens. So the results that we're talking about that could be most applicable to all immigrants, first and even second generation, are the areas in MIPEX on anti-discrimination, on health, on employment, on education, whereas the policy areas that we look at on, say, family unification, permanent residence, citizenship, are more specific to the situation of non-EU immigrants. And indeed, we have to look at how the integration experience does differ for EU EEA citizens, because their needs are often different, but also their plans, their long-term plans might be different than a non-EU citizen who really sees their future more clearly in Norway.
Thank you. And please comment on that crossroads between migration policies and integration policies, these measures that have been introduced since 2015.
Well, I think you're right that there's been a real sort of crossover between the two policy areas, where integration policy is used also as a sort of signaling device of what it means to become a member of Norwegian society and the sort of norms that you need to abide by in order to do that. And one of the things that have really been highlighted is that you need to be self-sufficient. You need to be, and this is where the income requirement comes in, and there's this sort of emphasis on the fact that in this comprehensive welfare state, there's a trade-off on immigration and sort of the potential costs, and this is where they really emphasize the self-sufficiency and the transition into the labor market and the earning of money. And I think it's a bit paradoxical, I think, especially when we look at immigration of refugees and people who come to Norway for protection, because they have a different starting point, and the route towards self-sufficiency could be maybe a bit longer. They didn't come here with the basis of maybe just going straight into the labor market, and then with the self-sufficiency requirement at the sort of 3-year mark, it's a pretty high expectation to set to people, and I mean, I think it's a really sound aspiration. But then when you put it into practice, if you put it at this level, which becomes inachievable for many, then it becomes this matter of not recognizing the effort that people are putting in, and maybe undermining basically making these policies much more contradictory than they would need to be.
And do you think these are costs that the government and civil servants are aware of? These costs, potential costs. I mean, we haven't seen results yet, but there is of course a potential for sanctions/incentives to have this effect, where the bar is just too high for some of the migrants, and they become demotivated and do not it does not, the potential incentives did not work as incentives, but instead demotivate and
I'm
create
sure
confusion.
this is something that policymakers are well aware of, and it's coming up among people who work directly with refugees who highlight this challenge and highlight the. But it's, of course, it's very difficult to create incentive systems that have exactly the effects that you want and that don't simultaneously have unintended consequences. So I think we need more evidence to see exactly how this works in practice.
Right. I just want to plug in a comment from Nora in the chat, who points to integration should be a discussion also including the second generation and etterkommere, as we say in Norway now. And I just want to point to the excellent study done at the Institutt for Social Research, headed by MIPEX, which concluded last year and found a diverse but quite optimistic pattern about the achievements and the participation and integration of etterkommere or second generation among different immigrant groups in Norway and their descendants. I just want to point to that. But I want to ask you, Thomas, please to comment a little bit more on the international overall trend in this field of integration policies. Do you see some patterns there that you could comment on and kind of share with us, please, Thomas?
Well, interestingly, of the 52 countries, the average country has gone up 2 points on MIPEX from 2014 to 2019. So then it's also very striking that Norway has gone down 3 points, backsliding on its commitment to equality. So it also points out that the Norwegian approach is not that similar actually to the way that most countries and even many other Nordic countries responded to the challenges in these times. Integration policy is slow to change. So of course, most countries only go up 2 points over 5 years. That's not a lot. So it does take time, as Anna said, for people to see evidence, understand evidence, listen to immigrant voices, and make these changes over time. But we see many countries starting to address whatever their weakness might be, if it's security, opportunity, or rights. But it is a slow process, and unfortunately, when we make big changes, the effects often also only come in the long term. So we might not see the effects of these recent changes in Norway for several years. Luckily, international migration research has gotten much better, and we now have a lot of data over the past 15 years, particularly in Europe, that allow us to see what have been the impacts of previous policy changes, similar to what has been done in Norway, and we should really learn from the past.
I just want to hear your opinion on one more point here regarding the health strand. And I think it illustrates quite well the dilemma that Norwegian government feel that they confront with regard to undocumented migrants. So the score for Norway in the health strand is kind of, they get a minus on that point because there is a strict limitation to what Norwegian health system can provide for, or want to provide, or allowed to provide, mandated to provide by the government to undocumented migrants. And there is a pragmatic approach to this, which means that the government do not explicitly allow this type of health services for undocumented migrants, but it still exists in the voluntary and civil society sector. It's kind of accepted in a way, but it's not kind of fully approved by the government. And I think that is one of the, it illustrates the difficulty of a government trying to execute an immigration policy and a control policy, but which has obvious integration consequences. And of course now with Corona, it's a crucial field, and undocumented migrants, we do want also undocumented migrants to stay healthy in the situation. Please comment, Thomas.
Yeah, so what I would say is that we don't have a country that fully includes the undocumented in all ways, in the same way as citizens. and legal migrants. However, there are countries, and very different types of countries, not necessarily the ones that you would expect, that have found ways to be at least more clear and less discretionary in the way that the undocumented are able to access health services than compared to Norway. And I think that the COVID crisis has made people realize that health access is not just about these procedures that might exist and be understood by service providers, but health policies are also about public health and public health information. And so the more that these procedures are discretionary and delegated to perhaps, yes, on the ground NGOs, but not those that have the full capacity and not the mainstream providers, will mean that many people who could be benefiting are not, and have the impression that they actually are excluded. And at a time when we need actually health information and health services to reach everybody, we need to find ways to have some more inclusion of all groups, including the undocumented, through the mainstream system.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Anna, you could come in and comment if you want to on this kind of the dilemma in the health field and the dilemma of undocumented irregular migrants.
I'm not sure I have much to add, but I think it's really interesting now that we have this current situation with the pandemic, that the public health, obviously the public health arguments are really clear for providing equal access to everyone as a public health measure for the rest of us as well.
I have a question here from Natasha, who asks to distinguish does the MIPEX really distinguish between refugees that come to Norway and really see their future in Norway, and migrants who are more temporary migrants who have different needs and who do maybe not have access to the Norwegian course, etc. So working, labor migrants from mostly from within the EU. Does the MIPEX reflect this? And I think you answered that a little bit earlier, Thomas, but you can maybe reflect a bit more on that, please.
So MIPEX looks at what's available overall, right? So indeed, I mean, if a policy is not fully inclusive, then that will have an effect on the MIPEX score. The situation for refugees often requires different types of support, because refugees might experience specific obstacles because they don't have an effective citizenship, support of a state, the same type of documentation. So those issues are quite specific. But I wanted to give a kind of a more overall perspective, because I've seen this in the comments sections here. And I think that, what the MIPEX shows about Norway is that generally the policies in Norway are responsive to needs in the immigrant population, and they are aiming for equal opportunities. So then when people say, oh, but I don't see the full equal opportunities, and this group also has a challenge. Well, the fact is, if you would look more internationally, you would see that the efforts that Norway is putting in to equal opportunities is closing that gap in Norway more than in other countries. So of course, if you just look at the gap and say, well, their equal opportunities do not exist, they don't exist anywhere. I mean, if they exist in one country, it's probably due to very specific factors that are not linked to their policies. So what's important to remember is that these policies help policymakers and NGOs become aware of needs, listen to needs, and start responding to needs, and slowly start closing those gaps over time, particularly for those groups that need this support the most. But these types of policies also have benefits for other people who maybe it takes them longer, like more years in the country, to decide to settle or to decide to take up certain services.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, I think thank you for coming back to kind of the positive side of Norwegian policies, and there is a suggestion now to be discussed in the Parliament, even strengthening and trying to reform the introduction program. And I know that is a strong point in Norwegian policies. And I don't know, Anna, if you can comment on that, the Storting, that proposition and the proposed changes.
So I'm not sure I can comment exactly on how it might impact the MIPEX score, but I think there is a proposed reform of the introduction program, which is targeted at refugees, in which a key ambition is for more of the participants to complete formal education and to achieve a high school level education, which is correlated with better outcomes in the labor market. So I think what that shows is a willingness to support refugees with concrete sort of tools that they could use to reach the ultimate goal of becoming sort of self-sufficient, productive citizens. And I just wanted to comment just briefly on this past question about the fact that migrant workers who settle in Norway don't access these same programs. And I think some of the contradictions in integration policy have to do, again, with immigration policy and the fact that Europeans who come to Norway through European free movement actually cannot legally be obligated to complete language training due to European law. So sometimes it's not so straightforward as either. Like there's the relationships between immigration and integration policy are really complicated.
Yes, and I think that we have discussed, you discussed cessation briefly, and I think that is also a point to follow for people, and which may not be as well known to the general public in Norway. And it's we could, in a crude way, it's in a way an experiment that is being done after 2015, where refugees with acknowledged refugee status may lose their residency during the first 3 years originally, until they would get a permanent residency. But now we're pushing the limit, the 3-year limit, because of these requirements in order that you have to fulfill in order to obtain permanent residency, which means that there's a prolonged liminal period, temporary, marked by temporariness, which will of course challenge their integration in different ways, and also challenge the system surrounding them, who are set up to support and promote integration. So I think that is a policy that's pushed out there, which was decided in haste after 2015. And we're now the system is now struggling with dealing in a good way with this. And we haven't really seen the consequences as far as integration goes so far. Maybe these people will in practice end up with permanent residency regardless, because they come from countries where return are difficult to execute. But still, it's an experiment, ongoing experiment, which is exactly at the crossroads of integration and immigration policies. I think that's very interesting. But maybe I would just like to leave the word with you, Thomas, just for some final comments on the situation for Norway and the current MIPEX score, returning to the overall picture of how we scored and what people should look out for in the coming years. Please, Thomas.
Great. Well, I'm always thrilled to be speaking to Norwegian researchers, civil society, policymakers, because, as I said, I think that you are very attuned to international trends and evidence. So what I would ask is to look again in the MIPEX score in specific policy areas, and to see how the approach could become more flexible. The more that we assume that we know how immigrants are going to behave, like with this idea of incentives, the more that we really have to question whether we have the evidence to know that these approaches will work in advance, and they will not have differential effects on vulnerable groups like women that are tantamount to discrimination. So it is important, of course, to send clear and positive messages to immigrants and to the public that effort in integration is still possible, even in times of COVID isolation. but at the same time, by rewarding effort, we can also create a more positive sense of belonging and security that all of us need in these times to get through. I hope that Norway can continue to learn from partners in Sweden and in Finland, also from traditional destination countries like Canada and New Zealand. And I actually hope that these times of COVID will make us more aware that our policies do need to be offering that basic security and opportunity for everyone in society. So continue to follow the MIPEX launches that are going on over the next few months, to join launches in Finland, in Sweden, and elsewhere, with our international launch culminating on the 9th of December.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And I think it's interesting that this year I've pointed out the 3 different categories of integration policies. And I think that pointing out that Norway in the 2 first ones have a sound and a well-functioning, or apparently a well-functioning framework for integration, that long-term security for migrants may be challenged by these new regulations that came after the 2015 peak year arrivals. So I think that's interesting, and we should follow those with regard to them being a crossroads or a cutting point between the immigration policies and integration policies, and also look for, as researchers, be aware of effects of these incentives and see how they work in the finer mechanics, and then feed that back into the further development of integration systems. So I would like to tell all the viewers that all these links that I've been talking about will be available at samfunnsforskning.no, and at this event page that will be permanent. You could send the link of this recording to your colleagues, and we will keep updating it with also other data from OECD, etc. So you'll have outcomes, and we will provide links to the articles and the papers and journals that you mentioned, Thomas. So with this, thank you so much, Anne, for joining us with comments from OsloMet. And of course, a special thanks to you, Thomas, taking the time in this hectic period with all the launches on MIPEX. Thank you for commenting on Norway, and we'll stay in touch on this, and we will follow and use MIPEX in the years to come. Thank you so much, and thank you to the viewers that tuned in. Please follow us at samfunnsforskning.no, and thank you so much for this event.